Greetings, students, and welcome back to Monday's edition of Distance Learning Week 5. This week, we have a review with one homework question going over the highlights of adding and subtracting integers. Let's review the notes and the examples for the rules on how to add and subtract integers. From last week, the key idea is to add the absolute value of the integers, then use the common sign. For example, 2 plus 5 equals 7. We already knew this, but when we have two negatives adding with 5 negatives, we end up with more negatives. Negative 7 is the result. The trick is, when the signs are the same, meaning that the numbers are positive, just add them and keep the sign. So in this case, both of these numbers are negative when adding, so we add them and keep the sign that's negative. Now what if we had adding integers with different signs? In this case, we subtract the lesser of the two absolute values. What we mean by this is, which of these numbers are farther from 0? The 8 is closer to 0 than the 10. So we subtract the 8 from the 10 and we get 2, and then we use the sign of the integer with the greater absolute value. In this case, the negative 10 is negative, so we use that. In this case, the other example says negative 13 plus 17. 17 is farther away than negative 13, so when we subtract, we get 4, and then again, use the integer symbol for this number here that's greater. So, all we have to do is subtract the absolute values, and keep the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value. We can take a look at this by changing the example to maybe a word problem. If we got 8 points, but then we lost 10 points, we're in the negatives. In this case, if we lost 13 points, but got 17 points back, we end up with 4 extra points than we started with before. And now, whenever we have integers that are exactly the same number but different signs, we call these opposites. The sum of an integer and its additive inverse, or opposite, is always 0. So when the numbers match but the signs are different, the result is always 0. Including algebraic terms. So, opposites always have a sum of 0. We can try to look for these kind of clues in our math problems to always cancel out values that are opposite of each other to simplify the expression before we solve it. Now let's move on to rules for subtracting integers. From last week, we had to copy these into our notes. If the problem is subtraction, we use keep, change, flip, changing the problem to add the opposite. In the first example, we have 4 minus 2. We keep the first number, 4, we change the minus sign to a plus, and we flip or find the opposite of this 2, which is negative 2. In the next example, we have negative 5 minus 5. We keep the first number. It doesn't matter if it's negative or positive, we always keep that first number. We change the minus to a plus, and then we flip or find the opposite of this number that follows, the 5, which is negative 5. Third example, we start with negative 1, which we keep. We change the minus sign to a plus sign, and we change the negative 3 to its opposite, positive 3. We can then use the rules for adding integers from the previous slides before. Note, if the problem is already adding, you do not change it. Only change it if it's subtracting. Now let's take a look at the homework question. There's only one question right now. You must show adding the opposite for full credit if there's subtraction. The instructions say solve by adding or subtracting. So if the problem has some subtraction, change that part of the problem to add the opposite, showing all work. I advise that you review the rules before proceeding to submit this problem. We have to use all the rules from the previous slides to answer this long sequence of adding and subtracting. To get full credit, rewrite the expression, again keeping all the adding portions, but changing all the minuses to add the opposite. Rewrite below the new expression before you start combining terms. And then a final answer. Again, show all work by changing the adding the opposite, and I want to see that work for full credit. Some of you guys missed the extra credit opportunity from last week. I worry that some of you guys may not be participating and watching the videos to the full extent of participating by solving the practice problems. Please make sure to pay close attention in future updates and videos. I look forward to seeing your homework submissions and preparedness for the quiz that released on Wednesday. Until next time.